Hey, what's going on, everybody? How's everybody's Thursday today? Welcome to the Flipside Streamcast live. As always, on the fourth Thursday of the month. Dale's back. He let me go on my own last week, and now he's back. So
Now you're back.
yeah, that's true. I'm back too. So. But we got a fun one for you today. One I think we're pretty both excited about. One we're going to take, I think, in a couple different directions. And as always, we would normally do a book review on the last Thursday of the month. But we decided a couple months ago that we were going to look at Man in the Arena, that Tom Brady story on ESPN, and do a documentary review. I think there's a lot of leadership lessons in it. And full disclosure, I think both of us thought in the very beginning, sure, we'll get through all 10 episodes in one of our episodes. And going through it, and to be honest, I hadn't watched it until last week. We can't. It's very tough to do because there is a ton of leadership lessons that you can take from this and that you can gain from it. And very interesting. I thought it was very interesting about all that. With all those types of things. So I think that was good. So how you doing, Dale? Before we get going, how you doing?
Going good, man. Got a jam-packed day. Glad we're hopping in. And, full disclosure, right? We talked about doing this. We were going to hit the whole documentary, and then you hop on a call and you bail me out because I've watched it all before, and I was re-watching it. This is my month of Murphs, and I was month of Murphs, and I've been watching it again while I've been doing the Murphs in the morning. And so I'm only through 7 the second round through. So this morning I'm like, Flip's going to have to bail me out for, episodes 8 through 10.
Well, it's
but
good. I just
here you come. You're like,
much.
we're only doing 5. I'm like, oh, thank God.
So another full disclosure, one of the reasons why I have not watched this from the beginning is because it's a very painful thing for me if everybody gets my drift.
I know. Like before in the green room, before we got started, I see you go take your Lions Guide shirt off.
I did, and I had to put it on. There it is, right?
So there's no bias here.
None. But here's what I'll tell you. Before watching this, and even before it came out, when Brady left for Tampa Bay, I did see him in a different light. When he's not pummeling you for 20 years, 19 years, whatever it was, you see the person in a very different light. And I actually saw him change. So Buffalo fans probably have a very unique perspective of him than anyone else. Well, unless you're a Jets or you're a Dolphins fan as well. So full disclosure, I am 100% born and bred in the 716, Buffalo, New York. I went through the wide left. I went through the next 3 years, the Lost Helmet. I went through it all. Go watch Falls of Buffalo if you haven't watched that one too. That's an amazing story about those leaders too and what they went through in some very much adversity going through it all. So, but I'm going to try to stay as unbiased as I can with this. And I looked at it as leadership and not it as a team, even though it was painful to watch Buffalo getting destroyed by them all those years and just reliving the open wounds. But yeah, so let's go. So
you're re-traumatized through.
Yeah. And I think something too that we're going to find as we talk today, and this is for all of our listeners and those who are going to watch later. There were life lessons. There were football lessons, which I kind of equated to sports lessons. And then there were just how can you turn this into a team that you work with as a business or you work with as, in any other realm. And I thought it was good. And then the context too, being that it's football and that it's definitely an old boys club. There were some definite things about being in an old boys club that came out of it, which is, it is. It's, Laura Colbert and I talked about it last week that, you have to know sometimes that you're entering into that or that it is that. And we're trying to deconstruct some of that as much as we go. And the NFL is one of them. They're trying to, put in more women for coaching and stuff like that. And so I think some of those lessons came out, especially in the older episodes. I felt like I was watching Disney where they have to put, hey, you're going to see smoking by Pete, or whatever. Mickey's going to, whatever, say dumb dog or something like that. So but it was good. I thought we're going to get into those. And so for that, next context, for those of you who didn't know, and I honestly hadn't put two and two together. I think some people may have. Man in the Arena came obviously from Theodore Roosevelt. And that was a speech that he gave. It was actually called Citizen in a Republic. He gave it, and this was in good context. I did a little bit of research on this as well. Those of you who don't know, he wrote the speech while he was on his hunting tour after his presidency. So it is after he technically was in the seat of being the president. He came out and then he gave a really good, one of his probably most memorable speeches about it in Paris. And he did it to a group of high aristocrats and, full service officers is what they were saying. And I want to read it to start because I think it gives a great context to the whole thing. So let me do that. So April 23rd, 1910, again, a year after he left office, Theodore Roosevelt wrote, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, those whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So that is a place shall never be, those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." Moving, right? Very moving. And once you watch the docuseries, I think it's fitting. It's absolutely fitting to find out what happens and everything. So let's get into that. What's your thoughts on that real quick?
I love it. That Man in the Arena, that speech is actually kind of new to me. I'll give props to Jeff Harris, who, um, we kind of got like a little private group that we call the Wolf Pack. So if you ever see those of you on LinkedIn or anything else, you see me talk about the Wolf Pack and kind of hashtag, if you know, you know. I'm talking to a group of ultra performers that I've got the privilege to intermingle with, and Jeff Harris is one of them. And he has this like posted over his desk or something like that, and he took a picture of it and told us all about it one day. And I was like, wow, and so it's pretty powerful. And what I love about the speech is, especially in today's world, this judgmental world, you've heard me say here, like, we need more courage. It's the courage to do what's right, even when everyone's looking, right? That to me, and Man in the Arena is talking about that, right? Like, to put aside the judgment of others. And one of my first Lions Guide posts, when this thing was just when this silly little thing was just a Instagram page that I was trying to put inspirational stuff that inspired me, was, why do you care what cowards think? And that's a bit of what, Man in Arena is all about. And so I came to love it, really respected it, like being a part of this docu-series. And like you said, the story it's telling. But yeah, and the whole series, man, it was put together very well. The humility throughout, right? In so many ways. I think certainly, obviously, I had my own judgments of Tom Brady coming into it.
I think we all did.
Yeah, I mean, because like we, we're not the Bills, but Baltimore, like they talk about, like, man, we hated playing those guys, like especially AFC Championship.
Everybody did.
Yeah.
Right.
But man, being a youth football coach and watching this, like, had so much respect for the story as it was told, him as a person. Again, he's telling the story, so I truly don't really know the guy, but kind of feels like he's opening the veil a little bit and allowing us to dive in. And I did honor his humility throughout, where he'll say, like, I screwed up here. This was me. I shouldn't have said that. And he certainly, I've seen enough ego to feel that he was not wearing the ego throughout this. And I totally respect that, and certainly have a new light for the dude. getting clarity on it, really. So.
Yeah, let's dive into episode 1, which was in the arena. So that was kind of the introduction to it all.
Yeah.
That year, I think it was 01. They go through the whole gets very humbled in the draft process by getting picked number 6 or the 6th round, and thought he was a little bit better. But you could look back on his career and kind of see how he was a little bit, he was going up against Drew Henson in college, and he was, so he wasn't anointed. It wasn't like he was Peyton Manning coming out, which they reference heavily about, Peyton's coming out as number 1, and he's the number 1 pick and the best thing to Joe Montana type of a deal. And then you got this other guy, and I think obviously that sets him up, but I think you see some stuff where, even at that point, he gets into some things that he talks about when he was with his parents, and he was like, I'm going to be famous or whatever. And you see the youthfulness, and you see the whole air of like, we've talked about this before with ego, and there's a fine line between ego and confidence. And I think these are one of these positions where, to me, my eyes, you need a confident quarterback. You need somebody who's going to be able to lead your team straight from the beginning, especially in the days. Now, back then, let's also put this in context for our non-NFL viewers. Back then, it's not necessarily like that now. You could sit on a guy and wait behind someone, and teach a rookie how to come into it, right? There's always that argument, you're going to pay him so much. And I can remember when Sam Bradford came out, and he was one of the last ones to get the huge, extravagant deal before they put the cap on everybody to make sure that the rookies weren't getting, explosive amounts for these busts to happen. And so what I noticed from the very beginning, though, is that, and I don't think I ever doubted this, right? And I want to make sure this is clear. One thing, even though I hated him, used that in the context because he killed us, I never thought he was never a hard worker, right? You don't get to that spot at all without being a hard worker. And regardless what I liked about him in the very beginning is when he got there and he was backing up a number 1 pick in the draft in Drew Bledsoe. And Bledsoe was he was the Peyton Manning type, before Peyton Manning. He was the number 1 pick. He was doing well. He had taken the Patriots to the Super Bowl, but they lost. I loved his attitude. I think that he was like, I'm going to learn from this guy. And what I drew most from the first thing was that you kind of, we're hearing it now, it just happened with Tannehill. And again, this is going to be a very sports-centric, obviously, docuseries that we're talking. But right now in the NFL, Ryan Tannehill said, it's not my job to mentor people. And we've heard that before, right? We've heard it with Brett Favre, with Aaron Rodgers before. And we've heard things about saying look, it's not my job to do that. And I think I loved how Drew Bledsoe came out and was like, I know he's there to take my job. I know he wants to play, but I want to help him out as much as I can. And I want him to learn about it. And I think Tom, this is throughout everything, one of the things in every episode, but specifically, and I wrote this down, dude, he said, he goes, I'm a sponge. I just want to be a sponge. And I think that's so important for people of all levels, whether you get installed as a CEO, whether you're the brand new hire and lowest person. I think on any level, be a sponge to things. Don't walk in and think that you just know it all. Obviously, he didn't. He didn't know the playbook. He didn't know the NFL speed, all that kind of stuff. But that was one of his big things, is that he was, not only was he going to make sure that he was going to work hard, but he was going to be a sponge. And that was consistent, I think, throughout, and it showed majorly in the first one.
Well, and I think that's something that manifested his greatness, right? And the success in the field, because looking back on that, in the environment he was in, with the coaching that was around him, the players that were around him, to be a sponge really served him, right?
Absolutely.
He didn't, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's just a call again to how important it is to not close your mind off, to be open to perspectives, new knowledge, all of the above, learnings from others and their experience. Like it's forever, right? Those are forever your investments in, your success in life and finding your passions, regardless, leadership, not leadership, whatever, right? Joy of life. Like you got to keep your mind open and be the sponge, man. Like, and I think, with regard to Bledsoe, one of the first things I wrote, just kind of watching it play out, was I respected his humility to come on the show, right? Like to come on
right. Yeah.
and be a part of the story. And you could tell, like, he was still emotional about it. Like that was a traumatic event, and trauma is different for everyone. But I feel I empathize with him in that event, right? Because you know how much these guys have invested in it. You know how invested he was. What a freaking player, man! Like just man, that dude's laying it all out. And so to be that guy and kind of have it lost, right? It lost. He lost it.
Sure.
Because I can't say that Tom Brady didn't earn it. Because certainly that could played out different, right? Like Tom Brady could have shown up like a rookie and they couldn't wait to get Bledsoe back, but that's not how it went.
Right.
But certainly that was a traumatic thing for Bledsoe. You could still see it on his face during interviews, like, and I empathize with that. But I thought it was still really awesome how respectful he was. And he even says in this episode, he goes, if Tom was an ass, like, I wouldn't be here. Like something like that. It's like,
it wouldn't have been easy to do this. Right. Yeah.
If he was anything other than what he is,
right.
He wouldn't have been there, So I appreciated that.
So speaking of people that I think, I was actually surprised how much it wasn't about necessarily Brady and how much more other people throughout the entire series that we're talking more about it, right? Yeah. So two points I want to bring up, and I think it's really important that these come through. One of my favorite books is the mentorship of Abraham Lincoln and who his mentors were, right? And how you get to be Abraham Lincoln. And I looked at it the same way of how do you get to be Tom Brady in that kind of retrospect, right? One of the greatest of your time at the position that you're at, probably, and in this case, he's probably the greatest. Not probably, he is. Two things that
Hey, could you say that one more time and touch your hat when you say that?
We're good. It's okay, Jim. I know where we rank. We're fine. I'm not worried about it. Okay. So, one, he came from a program that had Bo Schembechler as its hallowed kind of coach at college. He came from the University of Michigan. One of the things I love that Man in the Arena actually was written on their wall back then. And Bo Schembechler's answer was team, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, I can tell you, and again, I know my boss doesn't listen to these. That's one of the things he preaches, as well as saying, how do we get the perfect team? And how do you hire, in this case, draft or go out and get? I think he came from that team concept. And then when he got to Belichick was also nobody's bigger than the team, in this case, not a coach, not anybody. And I think he said that. But he said something I thought was really absolutely, in my thought, it says you can't win until you keep from losing.
Yeah.
Belichick said that. And I thought that was great. I thought that was like, to me, that falls back to being brilliant on your basics, right? Of like, look, when I look at football, they talk about, can you make the big play? But before they talk about, can you make the big play? It's, do you do the small stuff correctly? Every single thing. And what I heard consistently from Belichick was, look, everybody just has to do their job. They don't have to worry about other people. They don't have to worry about pieces. Just do your job for it. And if you do that, in my sense, that was and I relate it to Mattis, right? It's the same type of thing. That was being brilliant on your basics. Just do what you need to do. And they kept talking about the responsibility was to the person next to you, not to the coaches, not to the fans, it was the person next to you. That's what it was. And I thought that was so critical, not only for like a football team. Like if I was a coach, I would be watching that saying, how do I duplicate that? That's what I want to end up getting, right? I don't want to worry about just one superstar. I don't want to worry about, I think about a culture and I think about building something that's going to be that way. I thought that was I thought that was absolutely, you know, and I think Tom mentioned in this whole thing, and again, I think it resonates throughout all kinds of stuff, but you know, it said it's a series of small steps. You can look back, and after you take all those small steps, then you can look back and see how far you've come. And he said that at the end of this thing, and I thought that was awesome. I just think, again, in business, people are like, what's the next big thing? What's going to happen? And nobody gets that the small steps that were taken, you know, those things aren't brought out to light, right? And you see it sometimes with, you know, you look at Steve Jobs, you look at Gates, and you look at them, see them pictures or see a talk from them back in like the 80s, and they're grinding, man. Like, it's a grind to do things, and nobody's just all of a sudden, poof, getting something out of nothing. And I think that's so important to kind of to take away from it. You know, I used to tell people all the time, I was like, look, nobody works hard for 5 years in the Navy and doesn't get promoted. Like, you do. Like, if you work hard, do what you're supposed to do, and hit your wickets, you're going to get that way. But I just thought it was interesting point that those same principles were resonating there in episode 1. I just thought that was pretty interesting.
I had written down a lot of the same, right? Like the team thing. It just was shouting there's no ego here, right? Like you just couldn't put yourself above the team. And you can't win until you can keep from losing. I agree. Like it was again, the part of, you watch these organizations like chasing like bigger clients, but they're losing all their smaller ones, right? Like, and it's like, there's another episode later, I think, called Stopping the Bleeding, that kind of talks about that too, that, you know, and I don't think you can be growing until you're, you know, because I always talk like with clients and others about that. That's a client in, client out, right? Someone's coming in the front door and someone's walking out the back door. Well, what good is that, you know, to a business? You've got to close that back door. You've got to build the house so that you can bring in more clients, not, you know, you got to go get clients because you're losing other ones, right? Like you know, so that you can't win until you can keep from losing. I found like really translated to what a lot of leaders need to know. It's like, look, we can avoid the issues all we want, and we can distract ourselves with that shiny thing that we're going to go win, but it's all for naught. Like, you're going to keep chasing that shiny thing, and it's just going to be flowing in the front door, out the back door. And I bring that up because you see that, right? And I say and shine a light on that just for awareness, right? Like, you've got to batten down the hatches in order to grow. Like, you've got to address these issues. And one of the things I love about Traction, you know, we've talked about in the EOS model, is every week in the L10 meeting, the leaders are listing the issues. What are our issues to solve for our issues, right? And that forces a leadership team, in my opinion, to talk about those things, right?
Yeah,
where are the holes in the bucket? Where are the holes in the boat, right? Those conversations are as, if not more important than how many sales we're going to do this quarter. You know, where are the holes in the bucket? So anyways.
Yeah. And even in the first one, again, and this was probably I'll be honest, like the most notes I had was the first one. And you can kind of understand too, there's definitely junior moments of leadership that came out the most here, right? Of Tom being a good follower at this point. You saw Willie McGinnis come on, who was a senior guy on the team. And, you know, they talk about him having the first locker and everybody having to pass him. And, you know, the gauntlet that you had to run through it. But I think it was one of my key points to this too, is that traditionally, and again, for those who aren't sports fans, you know, the quarterback ends up being the leader on the team, at least on the offensive side. And usually there's a defensive leader too. It struck me as pretty interesting, though, and I know I knew this, but, you know, Tom can only control 50% of his game, right? 50% of the game was on defense. 50% of the game was on offense. Tom couldn't control what the defense was doing. And I thought it was interesting to have, and I don't know if I looked at it ever, because I was looking at it with a leadership lens. I was really focusing on you know, like Willie McGinnis in this point was really he was the Tom Brady of the other side. And not to say that even Tom Brady was a leader at this point. I mean, he was thrust into it because Drew got hurt. And so, but one of the key moments for me was when they got to that Super Bowl and Tom is going crazy in the tunnel, right? He's a 20-whatever-year-old kid. And Willie McGinnis grabs him and he goes, hey, man, we're going to need you the full game. Calm down, relax, take a breath. And I just look at that as whether that's a chief executive advisor, whether it's your chief of staff, whether it's a mentor or mentee, I think all leaders need to take that pause and take that advice and say, dude, you've been grinding for 3 weeks straight. I know it's been a big project. Take some time, go off on your own and relax. In this case, he just told him, chill out, brother. You're a young buck kid and we're in the Super Bowl. I need you as calm as you can. I need you focused. And we've heard it time and time again. Your first Super Bowl, you're like, oh, here we go. I thought that was interesting.
I was going to say, I don't know if you picked up on him, but that was after Bledsoe had gotten in his face and kind of incited the get crazy,
Sure.
right? But
two different things, right?
Yeah, but Willie McGinnis then saw that and pulled him aside, said, hey, man, relax, time to go get focused. And I too took that. Man, did you look at my sheet? But I wrote that event down as well, because what I noted from a leadership and organizational standpoint was the important role that seniority plays, right?
Sure.
Because that's a moment of seniority having influence to the new guys. And I just wanted to honor that, right? Because a lot of people, you might not be in charge, but you've been there 8 years. You have power. You have power of influence. And we talk a lot about on here, like, influence is indirect leadership. Like, you're not directly in charge, but you're the senior guy on the team. You've got influence. And that was a great example of how, and we see this, you did your whole thing on the military enlisted and officers and how the senior enlisted have influence on the young officers or whatever. And that shines out again, right? You've got the field general new, he's got his butter bars on and he's going in the Super Bowl and you've got your, senior enlisted going, hey man, sir, we got to button down. Like, we got to get focused. And I loved it. I thought it was
I thought that was great. It had, watching Bledsoe and being followership and really helping him and saying, okay, here's my new role. It sucks. Knowing inside he was hating it, I'm sure, because he wanted to be out there. You got Willie McGinnis coming on, and those both think about this. Think about a senior person who gets, and it wasn't his fault, obviously, but he got demoted, right? Bledsoe got demoted because of that, and look, credit, and this is kind of maybe where we'll wrap up season or the first episode here. I think this was interesting to me. I knew there was a puppet master the whole time, right? And obviously that's Belichick, and he's making really hard decisions about what to do, right? And obviously he had tons of experience before. He was under Bill Parcells before. He had unwittingly beaten the Bills in '91 with his defense. But what I thought was very interesting is that I think this is never talked about in business. It's never talked about, but you had someone who was doing things, but you also had, and this is you can't plan for this. You had luck. There was a little bit of luck that let the path go on to the way it was. And I always, I used to be my buddies when I got to Whidbey Island, they would call me right place, right time, because I was just, the rescues would kind of happen. They'd been a dry spell for rescues. And then all of a sudden, I had the beeper on and every time I had the beeper, we would get a call for something. And I had someone like Willie McGinnis, Benjamin told me before a rescue, he's like, take a breath, get your stuff. Let's go do this rescue. And I was like, okay, it was my first one. I felt the exact same way Tom did, right? But the luck piece to me, the Tuck rule happened, and I had watched the Tuck rule documentary before with Charles Woodson and what had happened there. But I looked at, as I went from season to season, there was one moment that there was just a bit of luck in how something had happened. And I thought that was really interesting in it all. But again, you put yourself in the position to be lucky. And I truly believe that, right? If you do the right things and you get there, I don't want to say it's always going to happen, but you're prepared for if it's not, or if it's going to be, like, and I thought that was a Bill Belichick thing where he was make sure people were prepared, do the little things. And then when the luck part happened, nobody had control over the way that the officials saw that play, but that had been completely different. And who knows, like that one little thing could have changed. I'm not saying I believe he would have been successful regardless. I believe that Belichick's whole thing would have, right? Maybe they wouldn't have won the Super Bowl that year, but they would have still won on to do things and whatever, right? So, but I wanted to put that in because I think being prepared for whether something goes unlucky or lucky that you don't have any control over, I think is important because it's resiliency. You can build that into your team. Because that was another thing that resonated throughout season 1 or episode 1 was, like Drew Bledsoe and his resiliency with stuff, or even Tom of saying, man, I got to learn this stuff. And how do I think there was some definite resiliency built in.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll give credit to Tom, even though kind of getting thrown in there, was he owned the leadership role early, right?
Right.
Even from his position in why he was there, why he was starting, like he's still running down the bench, like pumping up the team, like, so he's taking ownership despite the reasons that he was there. And I'll say, like, again, another hats off to Bledsoe. He still came in and supported the team, right? When even he was passed up, right? Like he was still there supporting the team. I'll say, like, you said a word before in another conversation, which was distraction, right? He did not serve as a distraction,
No.
Which was good for him. Like he still back to team. Like it wasn't about him, it was about the team. And I think that was important to the success of that, right? Because we, poor choice of analogies, but like people have the opportunity to be the cancer, right? And manifests itself and get in the ear of other players. And now you've got camps and right. Like, and who knows, but at least to me, it didn't come through in the documentary, but that could have been it. Like he could have been the about himself and his ego. And I say he wore it on his sleeve. Like it was hard not to see it.
Sure.
Regardless of what he said, it was hard not to see how he felt.
Yeah, he did those interviews in the locker room, and you just saw his face, and he was like, no. And even one, he said, no comment. And I think, so listen, hear me out, though. I think that's a Bill Belichick thing, too, of saying this is how we roll when we do stuff. And I think he knew that. We've seen players, and in upcoming seasons when Randy Moss came on board or whatever, we've seen players end up like that, where you could take, and again, we'll get a little bit football-centric here, but like you could take other people who are distractors, whether it's Antonio Brown when he was with the Steelers and, that type of a thing, or Mayfield a little bit now of what's kind of happening in somewhat of a way. It's not necessarily the same, a little bit different. But you could tell people, and let's be honest, there was less ways to distract, right? Less tempting ways to distract back in 2001. There was no Twitter. There was no Instagram. It wasn't like that either, where you could have instant access on your own to national media or to national outlets to be able to put that stuff out there. So It was only the locker room talk for that. But you're right. He could have easily did that. And my guess is that there was a little bit of Belichick saying, look, dude, because here's the thing. And I say this to my daughter struggled this year, first time playing high school soccer, in not a bad way. She didn't struggle with herself. She had never competed before, right? And like Drew, he didn't have to compete before because he was anointed from Washington State. He had come in, and then it was a crappy team, and so he got the job. And so there was no true competition. And I think, and you and I are someday gonna talk about youth sports, but I think the level of sitting on a bench and seeing something and being able to see it from a bench point of view, if you've never done that to me is a trait of sports that is that's highly, in my view, it's highly coveted. I know parents and I know people like, why would you want to sit? But dude, there are things that you can look at from the bench that you can't look at, in the game, right? You can. And you see it in a very different way in my eyes. And I think it's absolutely something to grow from. And it's a part of the game that if you haven't learned it, you find people that when they get to the stage and all of a sudden they get it taken away. I think about Powell's if your ego is tied to your rank or your title, and all of a sudden your title goes away, your ego, is going to drop. Drew didn't have any of that, right? He took it. You would have thought he was like, man, like I just got taken out, and he was good. I mean, like it. Look, we get it. We understand you were the guy, and now you just got replaced by this rookie. We get it, man. Like it's, we'll give you a little bit of leeway, like we talked about before. We give that leeway of saying, okay, you get that, but
it's perfectly human, right? Like,
yeah, I think so.
It's all the stuff I've been doing the last 2 months around trauma, and like I just looked at it. That's a traumatic event for him. Like,
sure, absolutely,
to just have his world flipped, the table of his world flipped over unexpectedly, and he's helpless to it. Right, like that's what's funny?
What's funny? You're not like when you go to war, they prepare you for war. They can't prepare you for losing your buddy next to you. That's not what you can do. They can't prepare you for what the head injury is going to do to you for a TBI. Like that's not preparable. But they prepare you knowing, in the best way that they can in the system that we have. This is what you're going to go do. This is what you might see. And even injuries, right? We can simulate injuries and the stress of injuries and what that can potentially be. But you never know until you're going to get there. You can make an argument that says backups are more prepared for the other part of it of not playing, whereas a starter who's been the starter and hasn't worked into it and just kind of got it handed to them for the right reasons, right? Because the team may not have that. So I really did look at Drew. And so you know who I think about? I think about Alex Smith, right? I think about Alex Smith and how he got replaced by Patrick Mahomes, same way, and he mentored him. And Patrick, I love, and I'm going to say this too, and I've learned, I've grown, matured over the time frame since I live in the Kansas City area. Patrick Mahomes gave Alex Smith a ring when they won the Super Bowl. And he went back and he bought him a replica ring, and gave it to him and said, thank you so much for what you did. You see great examples of people saying, I'm going to, I'll do it the right way and I'll help you mentor. And so I thought this was one of them. And I really did see, and Drew came to us, by the way. So we had Drew after this whole thing, Drew Bledsoe. So I looked at it that way too, and how he came to our team. And really, after we don't remember anything. It was a blackout era from after Jim Kelly retired till Josh Allen. Like it's a blackout era for us. So, but remembering that
the dark ages,
it is totally that way, right? I just happened to be in the Navy the entire time that was happening, so I just looked at it like that. But yeah, so I mean, again, we're spending a lot of time on episode 1 because I think it was one of the most important and some absolutely great values. But let's move on to 2 because I thought that.
Can I fill in 2 more things before we go? 2 more
things. Go ahead,
and then we'll jump. So like Drew, I'll say the other thing I noticed from that is that the team didn't second guess the decision to start Tom in the Super Bowl either.
Right.
They heard it and they were shocked by it, but they said, this is what it is.
Right.
Right. They did not carry that into the game.
Yeah, especially after he won the AFC championship for them. Drew came in and
but you think like the seniority of that team who had played around Drew, now he's perfectly healthy. Now we're going into the Super Bowl. Belichick says that we're starting him. I just noted that like the team, it hit them, but they moved on. They're like,
sure,
all right, this is what we're doing, and go. And I think like overall the lesson in this is you have to fight to stay in your position, right? Like you can't just think because you've been there, you're entitled to it, right? Like I think that was the overall lesson because what happened, right? Tom had fought to stay in that position. Not to spite Bledsoe, but he went in and put in the work. He took the responsibility, went and did his job and earned the right to stay there. He fought to stay in that position. So episode 2.
Yeah, episode 2. Right from the bat again, and we're gonna say this probably everyone. Brady comes off as I'm a sponge still, right? Like I'm still a sponge. And now he's in year whatever it was, maybe year 3, I think it was at this point. I think it was 2003 they moved to. And what I got from him and what he talked about was he was studying the leaders. He watched the leaders and he studied them. And what he did was he said he kept the good stuff and he got rid of all the bad stuff that they were doing. And I thought that was pretty impressive of he was making his own toolbox of who he was going to become. I think the impression I got was, dude, you could have easily won a Super Bowl, and we've seen it with other people that it happens where they won a Super Bowl and now he's like, what's up? I'm the man. And I did not get that. I mean, I'm granted every right to we won, right?
Well, who was the kid that went to the Browns that did that? Like just because he made it to the NFL, like before
Johnny Manziel.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like there you
go. Yeah, Johnny Money or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So he's in year 2, and now we're talking. I'm sorry, we're talking year 4 in episode 2. It's year 4 for them, right? Is what it was. I wrote it down. So now he's still though a sponge. So now I think on year 4. And I think if you're an established quarterback by year 4, sometimes I think, and I got lost on me, that they're still young. If you're established and you've won a Super Bowl by now, like you're not. It's interesting to think that he came out and was like, I'm still a sponge. I'm still learning. I'm still looking at leaders and saying, how do I want to be? And that's really interesting to me because I felt like though he had the position, he was still going through his leadership process and still learning about things in year 4. So he had sat behind someone and watched him. He had then gone through the kind of what he had gone through. He's the established guy at this point in time. And I thought that was really interesting that he still was like, you know what, man, I'm a sponge. I still want to look about it. One of the things I wrote down, Brady knew, and he had mentioned it in this, he knew that winning how they did, it wasn't necessarily about him. It was about Belichick and the defense. He very much so admitted that was what was getting. He was doing his part at that point in time, right? He wasn't the gunslinger. He was just doing the things that needed to be done. And I think, again, this will be an NFL specific thing, football specific thing, but you've met quarterbacks who are gunslingers. You've seen quarterbacks who are great managers. It was interesting to watch and see what he was doing behind the scenes of really collecting his leadership toolbox, making sure his manager and not making the mistakes, which I felt like that was very Belichick-ish of how he came out to do, which showed me restraint as a leader, right? Because he didn't need to. He could have probably been a lot more flamboyant, and people would have been like, okay, this is, but I think obviously that's Belichick kind of team mentality, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. And they even quoted that, right? They said they made one of the quotes I wrote down was, they weren't collecting talent; they were building a team.
I wrote it too. I wrote it right. I wrote it.
Well, I got to read my list before you read mine.
It's my first one. Yeah.
But yeah, they talk about that, which again I respect, because like you can go even in an organization like, we got to go get, if we could recruit Johnny, the lead sales guy from that competitor, right? Like, but it's not about the talent; it's about the team, right? And the dynamic. I have, talked to clients, for example, that talked about having done that, but those folks were not a fit for the culture and didn't last, and it was disruptive. And you see some of this play out, sticking with the NFL, you see some of this play out in other teams, right? You like you were saying, the disruption in locker rooms or whatever, and some of that, and Moneyball is about that, right? Like,
right.
Money, that's Moneyball for you. And that's a great movie to watch about keeping the main thing, and what are the leading indicators to winning in baseball.
Success. Right.
As opposed to collecting talent to fill seats. And that's a great movie. A lot of lessons there, but again, it kind of came here with keeping the main thing and building a solid team.
Yeah, I looked at it real quick. So I wrote the same thing, right? It's not collecting talent; it's building a team. But when Belichick said that, I look at that as when you're hiring in the hiring process, right? Like there are things you're going to outweigh. You can look at a resume. People can put whatever they want on resumes, barring not outright lying on a resume, you could look at somebody and, they may have done something a long time ago. Yes, it could be misleading. And listen, it's the process, right? It's the process of how you got to get your foot in the door. It's the process that the calculator looks for certain words, and if you don't have it, it automatically gets thrown out. It's not the right process. I'll again, he doesn't watch it, so I can say it. Very props off. My CEO is like, I want to build a team. I want to build a team that has the right components to do things, and that includes, and I think this is important, that includes people who are going to maybe disrupt a little bit because it needs it, right? You can't have everybody singing Kumbaya all the time. You want to make people, there has to be some pain points at some things to get people to grow, right? If you're not comfortable with something, whether you're doing, like Laura and I talked about last week, generational things where you have to get people from different generations to do stuff. I thought the NFL was the same way, and I thought Bill was building his team like the same way, right? So you looked at the situations and you were like, so one thing that happened in this episode was Lawyer Malloy, who was obviously, without Willie McGinnis and Lawyer Malloy, they probably wouldn't have won before. And he was a very big person, leader on the team. All of a sudden they bring in another safety and they thought they were going to complement each other. And the next thing you know, Lawyer Malloy gets hauled off. And I think that affected Tom. Tom was like, that was my guy. He lived five houses down. Yeah. He was my buddy. And for Tom, he understood the business side of it. I think at that point is what he kind of even mentioned. And I thought that was really important. And I thought about it in leadership of saying, look, whether you are the person making that decision, and we don't know what they didn't go into why Bill and those guys made that decision, but it was a realization for Tom saying, okay, there's another side of this whole thing than just about the game and just about the leadership. And that's got to be taken into account. I think when you make business decisions, there are times when you could be best friends with somebody, or you can be whatever, and you're in a position of power and you have to say, okay, hold on. I need to hold you accountable at this point in time. And that's not the friendly thing to do all the time. I thought that was really interesting. And I thought that the way that they handled it was, look, to every other player on the team, do your job. That was Bill's thing. Do your job. Your job is not to worry about Lawyer Malloy and worry about, we'll take care of that in the media. That's our job, right? And it happened afterwards when Spygate, same thing. Compartmentalize, and I'll get into it the next one, but it was, this is a business decision. This is why we did it, and we're going to move on from it, and we're going to build from it. And I respected that, and I thought that was pretty interesting to do.
And that's why, we hear about so much in the military, just why fraternization is an important topic, right? Because it brings the emotion, right? We're perfectly human. And, more often than not, if fraternization's happening, the emotional decisions are being made. Correct. Probably more often than the right decisions are being made. And that's why we get taught those lessons in leadership and NCO schools and on up, because it's important. I love the part about this episode where they started talking about ignoring the noise. I think that's just an important topic, personally, professionally, as an organization, that you've got to ignore the noise and stay focused. I mean, you've got to stay focused on what's important. And again, it still resonates with me, your word distraction, right? And I felt that's again where this comes in, that you've got to ignore the noise, because they're not serving, they're really just distractions, whatever they may be. So that was something I wrote down here. And another thing I took away on this episode was like, regardless of the obstacles, we're going to put in the work.
Yeah.
Which is pretty powerful.
There's no doubt in my mind that, again, with that much success, sometimes here they go again, or you can blame it on, later on Spygate happened, in whatever year that was. And, and you're like, oh, here they go there. It's easy to when you're on the losing end of it all, to blame extra things, but there's no doubt in my mind throughout all of this, they were going to work.
Richard Sherman actually says that exact thing. He's like, if you got to make the excuse that they're winning because of Spygate or some balls and stuff, you were going to lose anyway.
Right. Absolutely.
Those 100%. Are his words. Like,
yeah. They dynamically picked people apart, and they did it for a long time. And I think Brady, Brady took that later on, and no lead was safe. I mean, obviously the Atlanta Falcons learned that the hard way, but like it was that way from it. And that kind of moves us into episode 3. Here's what I found interesting. And we're in 2004 now, right? And they win that year too. But what I found interesting was, and Teddy Bruschi was in this one a lot. What I found interesting was Brady's like, I'm tired. Like he admitted, like, I was tired of, okay, let's do it again. But he was tired. Like he was just, and I think one of the things I found is that you can get to a point where your batteries are just so hype and you get so right. What drains you, and he's still young in this whole thing too. And this point, I think he's only 20, maybe 5 or 6 or something like that at the time. He had success early, and then life is about to really hit him, and the rigors, like you're so high on the juice for so long. And then you get into it and you're like, okay, now the sustainment part of it. I look at Facebook and I look at like did Zuckerberg was high on life and he's getting everything else and it's going well. And now all of a sudden these huge social issues happen, or Facebook changes and it becomes something completely different. And you can't just back out of it. You're fully committed to life into it. Tom, it happened to me with that where Tom, I looked at it, and one of the things I really loved about this episode is that Belichick was talking about suppressing success. He wanted to make sure that in order to keep them hungry, in order to keep them going. Now, he would berate people on a Monday about very simple things, and the way he went about it was very old school boys club type thing. It is what it is. I'm not condoning or whatever, but I did like the fact that he was suppressing it, and Teddy Bruschi said it, and maybe I'm sure you wrote this one down, but he said our mentality was compartmentalize the victory, compress the success, and move on to the next one. I thought that was absolutely powerful, of saying you can't rest on the last game. I looked at it in business and going, you get one deal, great. Take your lessons from it. Celebrate it for a moment and then move on. And what are you going to do the next time? Obviously, they're working week to week. They know that their business decision, their businesses are going to be from week to week is what their gains are. But I thought that was great. Compartmentalize it. Don't ride too high on it. Take your lessons from it. Move on. I thought that was a great lesson to take.
It is, because look, man, there is no finish line. Right?
Yeah.
There is no finish line.
Infinite, right?
And you'll have folks come into your organization. I did this, and this is where I went to school, and this is what I did here, and this is that. That's all cute, man. What are you doing right now?
Right.
What's the end of this week going to look like because of you? All that other crap goes back to Les Brown, my favorite quote. Used to be's don't make no honey. I used to be this. I used to do that. And that here under Belichick was instilled in the culture. So what? We won last week, right?
Yep.
We've got to win this week. They were so focused on that next milestone. And even in the latter episodes, I was just kind of, challenged with this part about they were just talking about focus on the next object. They were only focused on the next week. And a part of me was like, well, that's not strategic thinking or whatever. But then I kind of stepped back and said, wait a minute. Their strategic plan was to win the Super Bowl, and each game was a milestone in that. So their focus was on each milestone of their overall goal. And the amount of focus, it was awesome.
Yeah, we talk about basics, right? Every week your basics have to be dead on, right? They put tactics in. I love the inside too, right? As a big football fan, I love the inside of how things were working on a normal team, where Tuesday you'd watch film, Wednesday you'd put in something else, Thursday you'd go through it all, Friday you were just basically going through walkthroughs and be ready for the game. Saturday was a relax day. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, you got to have a system, man. Like, you got to have a system. And that was their system to prepare for the next milestone. And I say that specifically for those of you guys out there running an organization. You've got to have a system, period. Now, what you just described were the buckets of the system, and what happens within those buckets may change for each opponent that they're going to see.
Yep.
But you got to have a system, because you can't make adjustments if you don't have a system, so to speak. So
yeah, one of the big things they took from that too, and Tom even says it. He said, one of my big leadership traits is caring. I thought that was pretty dynamic. And again, you're in 2004. He's been in the league for 5 years or whatever at this point. So I thought that was really interesting that is part of his leadership thing. And again, when you're so good, you can come off very cold, and he comes off, when he makes interviews, he comes off pretty cold sometimes about how to do it. And I thought that was really interesting that he recognized that one of his things was caring and compassion. And we talked about resiliency today, and knowing that was there. And I don't think never thought he didn't care about his teammates, but to hear him say it was pretty good.
I wrote that he knew the whole team. Like, he knew them, like, so.
Yep. And you know what? That bled over into episode 4, when a very sports moment to me. And again, Randy Moss stepped on the scene. This was their big year that they had they went 17-0 and whatever, and finally lost to the Giants in the Super Bowl. I thought for Randy told a story that he snuck in to a game when they were playing, and went to meet him and said, I don't want to screw up your time. I just want to know, I want to play with you. He's reviving his career. He's got a bad apple attitude that comes through. And, I think Tom noticed at this point, management said, what do you think about him? And I think that was really when he became what we see as when you hear about Aaron Rodgers not having decisions in Green Bay and not being brought in on stuff. And, they went to him behind the scenes and asked him about that. And I thought that was really good, because I think Tom took on a different role at that time of being able to be a leader that Randy could look to and be able to kind of say, okay, how do I do it? I thought it was very big of Randy Moss, who I think until that point in time really got looked at as kind of a bad boy, if you will, right? In the bad boy receivers club that kind of people get labeled as. And then all of a sudden he goes there and super humbled. And I think that to me became, I think we I think we accredited it to, well, dude, when you're with Belichick, you shut your mouth and you do your job, or you're going to be off, which I think is true. But I think Tom took it on board and said, dude, I have this person that I could kind of help. And I looked back at his caring, and that Moss went out of his way to do that. I thought it was just really, really well to do. I found it funny that during the season, which is very unpatriot-like, Brady made that Super Bowl prediction and kind of was like 14 points. And I thought it was good, because he's got that confidence, and I think he let the ego slip out, like we talked about before with ego. And they got, right.
The universe makes you pay for such things.
It does. It totally does. And I thought it was really good, though, because it showed me a human side that we all kind of have, in saying it's a human trait. It's not a bad thing. It's a human trait. It was, if you want to say suppressed or however we deal with it, I just thought it was good to see it. And I didn't hear it, because I don't want, if the Bills aren't in it, I'm usually not watching any hype up to it. But I just thought it was really good to see that for him and understand it. And one of the things I took from the end of that episode was he was devastated. They were all devastated by that loss, right? And they all had it. And, the catch was incredible on the top of the helmet. I just thought, this was what I took from this, though. And he said this. He goes, it made me appreciate the good fortune of others when it doesn't go your way. I think that is so impactful, just as a human and being good, of just being like, hey, you know what? It wasn't us, but I learned to appreciate the good fortune that other people had when it wasn't our time, because he had nothing to do with that, right? He had nothing to do with Tyree catching it and Manning throwing it and Manning getting out, who isn't the ironic of a Manning trying to scramble is hilarious to me. But that it all happened, and that Tom came out and said that, that he does now, and looked at it, he goes, it made me appreciate the good fortune of others. That's not a business thing to me. That's not a leadership thing to me. That's a human thing. And I think that's important to make sure that we're not, being a leader isn't about being a robot and checking off things. It's just about, he learned a very human trait when he did that, or when he came out with that. And I think that's so important when we look at all this.
And from episode 4, the only note I really had, because it was a a fun episode to watch. But Strahan was on there, and he talked about he wasn't even supposed to be there, but his only intention was to be there and have fun.
Right.
And it really speaks to this mindset. Like, the truth of the matter is that our brain, our reticular activating system, if we have to do something, we're going to push back against getting it done, like the have tos. And if you think about the things that you have to do, truly it's like, I have to do this. There's some have tos that you hold off from doing. But when you think about, you get to do things, right? You change that mindset. Like, I have to go to work versus I get to go to work. I have to lead this team versus I get to lead this team. I have to do this Streamcast versus I get to do this Streamcast, right? It is such a game changer in your mindset and what you can get done. And I felt like Strahan's part in this episode spoke to, he just wanted to go have fun. He got to play football, right? He got to go play football. He got to go play football for another year. And how that turned out for him. He like didn't have nothing to lose. I mean, it's cool.
It's playing with that. All right, well, listen. So we are coming to the end of our time. We have a hard stop today that we have to do. I know we only got to 1 to 4 for our viewers, but you know what? It's worth it. We'd rather do content and push, and we can always do 6 through 10, and we're going to do 6 through 10. So we'll do 6 through 10 next month.
We'll do 5 through 10 because episode
5 through 10. Sorry,
yeah, episode 5 brings Giselle in.
Yes.
And starts to, I wanted to get into that one because it talks about the importance of the support system, right?
Absolutely.
So that's going to dive into this holistic approach of your life and your job and your leadership. I think that's important. So
I do too.
So that's good stuff. Go watch Man in the Arena so you can follow along. It's on Disney Plus, ESPN Plus.
Even if you hated the Patriots for all those years, and I promise you nobody hated them unless you're a Jets and a Dolphins fan, you didn't as much as we did. So, but listen, thanks for stopping by today. We appreciate it. Next week, we got the rant. I have a special announcement to make that Laura Colbert, who was our guest before last week on Leading Generations, is now going to work with me full-time on the rant. So she's going to stop by every first week of the Monday of the month to do the rant. So look forward to that. We'll also put out our schedule coming out here pretty soon about what's going on in the month of June. And we're excited about that. And on that will be episodes 5 through 10 on the last Thursday to talk about this documentary a little bit more. So we'll go back and deep dive on 5 through 10 for both of us. But otherwise, listen, everybody, sorry to cut it short today. But thanks for stopping by, and look forward to everything that's coming up.
PSA,
hit it.
Memorial Day is not Veterans Day. There's a reason for Memorial Day. It's to remember those we lost. So I'll appreciate thank you for your services and all that stuff. That's not what that day's about. Remember who we lost. Remember why we're here. Have a good Memorial Day.
And listen, have fun. Those people didn't die. Those people didn't sacrifice. For us not to, we live in America. I read a great thing today about someone who basically lost 2 sons and said, my son told me, before he went over there, Dad, if I die, make sure that Memorial Day is still about having fun. It's still about doing those things, but remember us, but have fun because this is what we died for. And I think that's really important to do. So have your reflection moment, but make sure you're spending it with the ones you love and be thankful for what we have. So good point. Have a great weekend. Have a safe weekend. Everybody, we'll see you next week. As always, Flip out. We'll see you guys later. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.